if you're going to tell Vladimir Putin, who fought this entire war over Ukrainian entry into NATO being his red line, hey, whatever territory you don't take here will be a part of NATO. Well, what does that incentivize him to do? Take more of it then. And so you present something that you know the other side can't agree to. And then when they don't agree to it, you go, look, we tried to negotiate.
So recently, Dave Smith exposed why Trump has walked away from peace with Russia over Ukraine and how he's actively prolonged the war in Ukraine with Russia and how he's being drawn into this mess and drawn into escalating it and what he would have to know about Ukraine's past to be able to solve this. So let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
But I took a lot of heat for the stuff I said on the show here a few years ago about the war in Ukraine. And look at it now, dude. Look at even, and I don't think they're about to end the thing. I think they're, which we could talk about, but I think they're putting poison pills in these negotiations already. It's what it looks like to me. But literally the deal that I was talking to you about, whatever it was, 3 years ago, when I was saying on the show that they had a deal worked out, a peace deal worked out in the first few months of the war in 22, and Boris Johnson went and killed the peace deal on behalf of the West to make sure this war kept going. But the deal that was in pencil, not pen, that Boris Johnson killed, was essentially recognition of the annexation of Crimea. It was, at the time, it wasn't annexation of the Donbass region. It was like independence for the Donbass region. And then the agreement that the rest of Ukraine would not join NATO. That was the deal that they had worked out. And look at where we are now. Now, the deal that they're even talking about, even as Donald Trump goes, there's going to be some land swaps and all this. Okay, well, what's he talking about? The deal right now that is the best case scenario that we're hoping we could get is that Vladimir Putin obviously keeps Crimea, keeps the entire Donbass region, gets a corridor from the south into Crimea, and the rest of Ukraine doesn't join NATO. So we have the same deal, just a little bit more in the Russians' favor, 3 years later, with hundreds of thousands of people having died in that process.
Probably 1 million people died in the Ukrainian process, and that's best case scenario, if even we could get that kind of deal from Putin at this point. But Dave's exactly right. In April of 2022, you had that Istanbul Accords on the table with some accounts saying that Zelensky had essentially signed on to the basic precepts of it. But like Dave said, he was talked out of it by Boris Johnson and presumably the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, all those madmen that wanted to escalate this thing to draw the U.S. into it, rattle sabers with Russia and nuclear power. And that's what we get. Hundreds of thousands of lives later, people being conscripted, old men fighting now, Zelensky banning opposition parties, oppositional media. And this is just supposed to be something that we look the other way from and just say, hey, we're there for democracy. It's just absurd.
Just to get back to not as good a deal as they had in 22. And so,
And if they don't sign that,
it'll keep going, which I think it's probably going to.
They're enlisting people as old as 60 now.
Yeah, and they have been for like a full year at least. They're throwing people up there. And the thing that's really changed, the reason why the Europeans and Zelensky and they're at least pretending to come to the negotiation table right now, which they don't say, but this is the truth, is that support for the war amongst Ukrainians has collapsed. I mean, not like gone down by a few points. It's collapsed. There was just a piece in this the other day. It was Gallup, I believe. Where they said they had their latest poll. Super majorities of the Ukrainian people, 70% around, want an immediate end to the war with negotiations on land swap. Like let's settle it however we got to settle it. They don't. I remember for the first 2 years of the thing, everybody who I argued with about the war in Ukraine, their talking point would always be, the Ukrainian people want to fight. And who are you, Dave, to tell them that they don't have a right to defend themselves?
Well, that was a stupid argument then, too, because that doesn't mean they're entitled to the U.S. Treasury to fight the Russians. That doesn't mean they're entitled to the central bank to print money to finance this mess while Americans are in debt. So that's true. That was the propaganda. Dave's exactly right about that. But it doesn't entitle them to the U.S. Treasury. I mean, it's just seen as the default now amongst neocons and the Ukraine first crowd that we would just default to, giving them $200 billion over the course of this 3.5 years. But it's just so absurd. But Dave's right. There have been mass protests now in Kyiv a few weeks ago for the first time. 70% of the populace under those polls saying they want a negotiated settlement now. I can see why. They're conscripting men, like Joe Rogan said. This is a mess. It's a catastrophe. Nothing they've done on the battlefield leads me to believe that they're going to retake the Donbass that they've lost when they could have, as Dave said, gotten a better deal out of Istanbul in the first place.
And then I would respond by saying, like, yes, it's true the Ukrainian people want to fight, but like, might that have something to do with the blank check that they've received from the world and the backup of the entire world? It's a different proposition to go like, do you want to fight if John Jones is at your back and goes, I got your back, dude, let's go fuck these guys up? You're like, hell yeah, I want to fight. But then John Jones leaves, I might be like, let's talk about this, but now the Ukrainian people don't want to fight. And by the way, I never believed any of that because I don't, I have my own libertarian views on things. And I'm like, if you're telling me that people want to fight, like, well, why do you got to conscript an army then? If they want to fight so bad, why you got to put a gun to their head and force them to the front line?
Kidnap people.
Yeah, you could just make it a voluntary force, and then we'll find out real quick who wants to fight. But
That's exactly right, and that's the problem with conscription. It's slavery to the state. If causes are popular, people voluntarily contribute to them or fight in them. That's why wars are able to be waged despite their unpopularity. It's the coercive force of government to conscript them. And Dave's exactly right. This mentality of, having John Jones on your back, that being the U.S., that's exactly pertaining to Israel, too. Israel does things that they wouldn't normally do if the U.S. wasn't bankrolling all their wars and their genocide in Gaza. So that's exactly right.
The point is now that even the Ukrainians don't want to fight over this stuff anymore. So there's just no justification for it. So now they move to phase B, which is essentially to pretend like they're negotiating, but putting all types of poison pills in the deal so that the other side won't take it. This is what they did with Iran, too. This is why we got into that 12-day war.
Yeah, the U.S. team, the negotiating team, went from no nuclear weapons program to no nuclear enrichment of uranium whatsoever. And that was a poison pill that they never could have accepted because they have a nuclear power program, which they need enriched uranium to support. So Dave's totally right about that, too.
As they're calling it now. But, it's like you put things into I was just reading the other day. It was on Axios. There's reports that Zelensky and the Europeans are like open to land swaps as long as there's, in their words in the Axios piece, Article 5 like security guarantees. So in other words, the rest of Ukraine's in NATO, which is the thing that caused the whole conflict to begin with.
Oh,
so like, yeah, and
that's what that means?
Yeah, that's the poison pill of poison pills. What makes you think that Putin is going to allow a new NATO-like, Article 5-like security guarantee arrangement to be formed amongst the same powers, maybe, that formed NATO in the first place to provide Ukraine a umbrella alliance just like NATO would provide? That's why this war was fought in the first place, as Dave just said. Putin will only permit NATO neutrality, otherwise he's going to keep fighting on. And when you say there's going to be security guarantees or flirt with Ukraine and NATO, which thankfully this administration isn't doing, but even these security guarantees, if I'm Putin, I'm just fighting on to carve up as much more territory as I can, such that territory is guaranteed not to be part of these stupid security arrangements.
It's Article 5?
Article 5 is the article in NATO, in the NATO agreement, that says that, like, it says that, like, if one of the countries is attacked, like, all the countries have to join together to help. It doesn't exactly say you got to go to war over it, but it's like you have to help in the effort if they're attacked. So essentially, that's what they're trying to ask now, which is, but if you think about it, right, it's designed to incentivize Putin to keep the war going. Because if you're telling Vladimir Putin, let's just say, which it's not exactly clear that he would even take the deal that I just laid out before, but I know that it's been reported that it was being signaled that he might be open to that deal. I get the Donbass region. He's got still, like, the Donbass region is Donetsk and Luhansk. And in Luhansk, I think As of right now, I think the Russians control like 75% of it. They got all of Donetsk, they got most of Luhansk, but there's still Ukrainians controlling part of it. And then he's controlling part of these territories in the south. So this is what Trump means when he says the land swaps.
Yeah, he means Kherson and Zaporizhia in the south. Those are the two provinces, kind of the southwest of those two.
Meaning essentially you get out of the Donbass region, give me that, and I'll give you back. You know, the land swaps are Putin taking what he wants and leaving you the rest. But if you're going to tell Vladimir Putin, who fought this entire war over Ukrainian entry into NATO being his red line, basically in the middle of the, or not in the middle of, as the war is potentially wrapping up, you're going to tell him, hey, whatever territory you don't take here will be a part of NATO. Well, what does that incentivize him to do? Take more of it then.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And by saying NATO, he means a NATO-like security arrangement. It would differ only in flavor, in marketing. It would be NATO. And again, you're not listening to the Russian vantage point of what they've fought and waged this war over. You know, and it wasn't just them. They were provoked into it from NATO expansion, from the U.S. overthrowing the democratically elected government there in 2014, the Maidan coup, where U.S. aid pumped money in. You had, you know, Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt talking about who should be part of this provisional government after they had done that. They overthrew this government, replacing it with one that was antagonistic toward Russia, while the U.S. flirted with adding Ukraine to NATO, and that happened through several successive presidential administrations.
Then why would you stop and give the rest of it up? And it does seem to me like that is clearly, at least from the Europeans, that is clearly the motivation of all of this, is to present something. It's you know, they do have their chess war moves. And so you present something that you know the other side can't agree to. And then when they don't agree to it, you go, look, we tried to negotiate and he just wouldn't take us up on this. And so what can you do?
Oh, God. You know, another problem with these conflicts and war in general is that people always want to pretend that there's one side that's good and one side that's bad. You know, and obviously Putin's the bad guy, right? Because they started the war, started killing people in Ukraine.
No, I wouldn't say he started the war. I would say that the U.S. started the war by overthrowing the Yanukovych government. Then you had a small-scale civil war play out between that new government that was bellicose toward Russia and the Donbass provinces. I think over 10,000 people died in that conflict, I believe. And then Putin invaded actually in the 7th year of that civil war that had gone on since 2014. Meanwhile, Crimea and the Donbass provinces, through plebiscites, said that they wanted to be part of Russia. So it wasn't Putin that initially invaded. You know, people like to think that we can just truncate all the antecedents for the sake of the CIA and CNN and whatever narratives they want to sell. But no, this war began in 2014, and that's the truth.
But there's so many factors that are going on. And then there's also the long history of corruption that Ukraine has always had.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also the weird deals that they were making with the Biden family to control all the different. It was natural gas, and there's incredible supplies of rare earth minerals.
Right.
It's like really valuable territory. You know, there's this incentive to create some sort of they were gonna try to, like, I think part of the plan was like get off of Russian power and make Ukrainian power like central, and then whatever they were making over there, the amount of power, I forget what the number was they said, but it's like trillions of dollars in natural gas, minerals, all these different things. And we're supposed to pretend that that's not also a part of the motivation? Like, didn't even Trump say something about a deal that they were doing with Ukraine that involved?
He wanted to get into a mineral deal with Zelensky as kind of I think a gambit to keep this war going. When the mineral deal depended on minerals that are under Russian-occupied zones, by the way, in the Donbass and the far east of Ukraine. It was a stupid idea, but, you know, as a gambit by Zelensky, it seemed to work to draw Trump back in, give him more support, because that happened right after Trump had actually cut off support for Ukraine for 6 days. 6 days only, I believe, and then he restored it in the hopes of securing the stupid mineral deal that was never sure to come and would be a bad deal for the American people anyways, because then, hey, if Russia attacked the Ukrainian places with minerals, then that would draw the U.S. back into another war with Russia, maybe even a hot one that time. It was a retarded idea.
Yeah, he got sucked into this talk about the rare earth minerals stuff. And, it's Donald Trump. It's like his weakness because, there's a lot of great things
Making
about
deals.
Yeah, there's a lot of great things about coming from a business background. But then there's like the weakness of it is that he's always attracted by you're like, hey, Gaza could be beachfront property. And he's like, ooh. And you can just see him like come alive with these ideas.
Land.
Yeah, it's always this stuff. But then the problem is that, and look, I've been very harsh on Donald Trump over the last few months, but I think he deserves it. And I think this administration is failing on so many levels, so profoundly, especially given the opportunity that they had. But, I heard him the other day. He called into a Fox News show, and he was telling the story of the war in Ukraine. And it's like, it just seems like he's telling, it seems like you learned this on a TV show. Can we get some books in your diet? You know what I mean? It's like, we really need someone here who's read a book about this, because he kind of had an idea of what he was talking about, but then he got it completely wrong. So he's trying to tell the story, and he's talking about the corruption of the Bidens in Ukraine, and you're like, okay, yes, that is true, but there's a whole story here that I don't think you're really understanding. Because he goes, look, this goes back to 2014, and so I'm watching this, and I got so excited for a minute. I was like, yes, it does go back to 2014. Thank you, Donald Trump. And then it goes back to 2014 when Putin took Crimea, and Obama let him have it. He just let him have it. Never would have happened on my watch, but Obama gave Putin Ukraine. And you're like, no, dude, that's not. Just go back 2 months earlier in that same year. The problem wasn't that Obama gave Putin Ukraine. The problem was that Obama took Ukraine away from Vladimir Putin. As I've played on your show, and you played with Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence has sat right here where I'm sitting and watched Gideon Rose explain to Stephen Colbert exactly what we're doing here. Russia, as Gideon Rose, the editor of Foreign Affairs magazine, said, Russia is Batman. Ukraine is Robin. We are stealing Robin away from Batman. That's what the Maidan Revolution was.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, with U.S. aid pumping in money to make this happen. They called it the Revolution of Dignity. It was really the Revolution of Duplicity, where the U.S. helped to overthrow Yanukovych, who actually was democratically elected. And then part of their propaganda scheme to sell U.S. involvement in Ukraine was, we're defending democracy. No, you undermine their democratic choice, their electoral outcome that the people there desired, just so that you can expand empire building projects against Russia. That's what this was the whole time. So Dave's right. Trump's narrative on this is wrong. I think it's the result of him having terrible people around him like Marco Rubio and Keith Kellogg that sow the CNN narrative, the neocon narrative. They're being influenced by neocons, and that's Trump's fault. He surrounded himself with neocons in his appointments.
That's why the USAID and the NED poured $100 million into this street protest, right? And so they overthrew the government, but after the West backed a coup that overthrew the government and put in a pro-Western government, they started talking big, well, maybe we'll tear up that lease. And so Vladimir Putin went, no, I'll just take it. And that was anyway, so he goes back to that, doesn't go back a few months earlier, and then misses the entire point. Because the point is that it's not just me being oh, I wish Donald Trump was into the same books I'm into or something like that. The point is that when you don't get that piece of the chapter, then you miss what's happening right now. Vladimir Putin and the entire Russian elite have been crystal clear about this, that they go, look, we can tolerate a neutral Ukraine. We could tolerate NATO up to Ukraine. Ukraine is neutral, and then there's Russia. We cannot tolerate Ukraine being a part of America's military alliance. That's a step too far.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And he put it in the draft treaty that he sent to Jens Stoltenberg. And that was the general secretary of NATO in 2019, I believe late 2021, he sent a draft treaty that said this categorically, making it crystal clear that that was at the crux of this matter, is that Ukraine can't be part of NATO. And if you put that in writing and NATO doesn't entertain the prospect of putting Ukraine in NATO, I won't invade Ukraine. And Stoltenberg, didn't do that. And he even boasted about it. You can see this on video, him talking about the fact that, well, Putin got war because we didn't do that. we still entertain the notion that Ukraine might join NATO. And it's not just, this kind of self-serving, like, sovereign decision that nations have to the extent that we are told. It's not like Russia has the ability to join BRICS. I don't think the U.S. would allow that to happen, especially after Russia replaced Mexico's government with one antagonistic toward the United States. But that's the exact parallel here that we're supposed to just swallow wholesale.
But every time we try to let him be neutral seems like it's never good enough, and that never actually works. So if you're going to come in here and say neutral's not good enough, they're going to be part of the West, then we're going to say, actually, we'll take them as part of Russia instead. But where I was really excited, because me and Douglas Murray are going to debate this issue. Right. And I remember when he first goes, the war had nothing to do with Ukrainian entry into NATO. And I was like, okay, well, let me just hit you with 2 points real quick. Number one, the head of the CIA, during all the years of Joe Biden, when he was the ambassador to Russia, he wrote the Nyet means Yet memo. He literally said that this was all what it was all about, and that Russia didn't want to do this, but they would if we kept pushing Ukrainian entry into NATO, and we did keep pushing it.
And by the way, props to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for making that article available. That never would have seen the light of day if we didn't have WikiLeaks and the heroic Assange to release that.
And I said the other one was Stoltenberg, who is not anymore, but was the head of NATO while this was happening. And he said that Vladimir Putin sent them in writing a draft treaty that all you have to do is put in writing that you will never bring Ukraine into NATO and I won't invade. And then he bragged that we said no. And then he invaded. But so I said this to Douglas Murray, and I was kind of curious. Like, I was like, what's his response to this going to be? Like, what is he going to say back to? Maybe he's got something I've never heard before that I'm going to have to be like, oh, shit, I got to consider that. And his response was, a libertarian quoting the CIA, I see. And you're like, wait, so that's your pivot is to I'm a hypocrite somehow, which isn't even hypocrisy. Like, yes, I think the CIA should be abolished. I also think it's relevant when the head of the CIA admits what the war was all about.
Yeah, exactly right. There's no disconnect in that. I'm a libertarian too. I want to see the CIA completely abolished. I'm not saying that the government shouldn't have some kind of intelligence, but that's not what the CIA does. The CIA drums up propaganda for regime change operations and psychological operations on the American people. And if you don't believe me, just look into Operation Mockingbird or MK Ultra if you want proof of that. But Dave's exactly right. The point here being that the CIA is the entity that not only is, but has proven to be the ones most likely to drum up and escalate and provoke conflicts with foreign countries, create proxy wars, military strikes. They did it in Syria. That was Operation Timber Sycamore. Propagandize Americans to supporting this. And even they are admitting that this is a disastrous thing. And by they, I mean William Burns, who he just referred to. He was actually the ambassador to Ukraine under Bush at the tail end of the Bush administration. He wrote that Nyet means Nyet memo back to Condoleezza Rice that said, listen, you can't entertain the thought of putting Ukraine into NATO. None of the Russian factions will allow it. This is the reddest of red lines when it comes to our relations with Russia. And if you do this, it will provoke a conflict with Russia in the future. You can see this. Look at the Nyet means Nyet memo if you don't believe me. But great interview. Dave's exactly right. I am worried that the Trump administration's handling this terribly. In fact, I think that there's just an ironclad proof of that based on the last few months. Trump hasn't done anything to essentially depart from the actual policy of the Biden administration outside of open talks with Putin. And that's good. I like negotiations. I like peaceful discussions, but it hasn't panned out in any change in policy. I don't think it ever will, as long as Trump isn't being willing to give up what it takes. And that means acknowledging that Russia has the Donbass, they have Crimea, and Ukraine's not going to be in NATO, and the U.S. needs to disengage, withdraw all aid to Ukraine, all intelligence. I think Trump fears looking weak because, he lambasted Biden for being weak, for getting out of Afghanistan, and there were some bunglings with that. They left, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons for the Taliban to take once the Taliban was replaced with the Taliban after 20 years. And he doesn't want to be seen as that kind of president. But at what cost? How many more hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have to die? How many more billions of dollars does he have to give the Ukrainians while Americans suffer in America? This is America last. That's what Ukraine first is. Ukraine first is America last. So I'm glad Dave understands this super well, better than almost anyone in the world. But let me know down below, do you agree that Trump has bungled the policy toward Ukraine? What can be done to solve this outside of disengagement? And is Trump using security guarantees as a poison pill, as I believe? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Joe Rogan. Thanks, Joe, for hosting this interview. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support this channel. And as a gift to you in return, I will give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.